So now I'm going to queue up our next presenters. I first met John and Susan McFadden by email and phone a couple of years ago when I was doing research to start the JF&CS Memory Cafe. And I found out that they had a network of 7 memory cafes in northeastern Wisconsin, and I contacted them and said, oh, I wonder if I could ask you a few questions. And they said, well, we'll send you everything that we have. We'll share everything that we know. Go for it. And that's just who they are. John and Susan are leaders in the Fox Valley Memory Project in northeastern Wisconsin, Go Badgers, which includes memory cafes, a diagnostic center, a dementia-friendly business campaign, and many other components. They travel the world. They do something they call dementia tourism, which helps them learn about what is exciting and promising around the world, and they're going to be sharing some of that with us. They're authors of numerous articles and the book Aging Together, which you see, there's an example up here on the table. It's a wonderful book. I encourage you to order it. John is a chaplain. Susan is a psychology professor, so they bring expertise from their disciplines. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the two of them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Beth. Well, John and I are delighted to be here in Massachusetts to learn from you about all that is happening here. I was very interested in the slides that Beth had put together that were rolling as we were coming in and meeting one another. There were a couple times when I just wanted to stop the slides and think about it more, because you've got some really exciting programs happening here in Massachusetts. What we want to do today is to tell you about some of the things that we have had the privilege of learning in our travels around the globe, really we haven't gone to Australia yet, but to tell you what we have learned from others, primarily in Europe, and have brought back here to try to use Northeast Wisconsin as a kind of laboratory for figuring out how to do dementia-friendly, dementia-inclusive community. You're going to hear me use those two terms. You can see dementia-friendly in the title here, but in a couple slides I'm going to say dementia-inclusive. I don't know how many of you saw an article by Dr. Al Power that came out about 6 months ago in which he was somewhat critical of the idea of dementia-friendly. And he was urging us to think more about being dementia-inclusive. And what he meant by that is that we can be friendly at kind of a distance. We can feel good about being friendly. Oh, I'm so friendly to these people who have dementia. But do we include them in our planning and execution of programs? Well, you did, and thank you, Mike, for being here, because that's a wonderful example of being dementia inclusive. That's going to be a theme that you'll hear us weave together here this morning about including people who have dementia in all that we do, not just providing programs for them. So I'm going to start by talking about some of these things that we've learned in our travels, and then I'm going to hand it over to John for a kind of case study to drill down locally and tell you what we have done in Northeast Wisconsin as a kind of example of pulling things together, which is not unlike what I hear happening in various communities that you represent. But let's start with the globe. And there we are. And this is really astonishing. This is information from the World Health Organization that says that around the world, people who make it to age 60 can expect to live another 19 years. And I really think that that is not usually in our consciousness. But because of changes in healthcare, nutrition, globally, this is rather astonishing. And then if you look at the other statement that I have up there, also from the World Health Organization, by 2050, not so far away, people age 60 and older will account for 22% of the world's population. So sometimes we have trouble with percentages, but think about it this way. It's at least 1 out of every 5 people. It's really astonishing. Another statistic about demographics and the demographics of aging that you've probably heard is that persons age 85 and older represent the fastest growing age group in our country, meaning that there are more people having their 85th birthdays every year than babies are being born. Okay? So I think this just all kind of that gives us a sense of what we're talking about here. And of course, the most well-documented risk factor for Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia is age. Very, very simply, why we're here. I want to do a little bit of Dementia 101, if you don't mind. I'm sure many of you in the room are familiar with everything I'm about to say, but I just want to make sure we're all kind of on the same page with this. And so just to give a very broad definition of dementia, a progressive impairment in memory, cognition, and the ability to reason. And cognition is a big term that brings together everything from paying attention to acquiring information, retaining information, accessing the information, and then doing something with it. All right? It is a progressive impairment in those abilities. And a theme that you will hear John and me reiterate throughout our talk is this idea of time and progression. And it's something that if we are going to have dementia-friendly, dementia-inclusive communities, we need to pay attention to time. Now, we have some linguistic challenges here. Some challenges of how do we speak about this that we're all here today to talk about. We often see in newspaper articles and magazine articles, and we hear it on television, people talk about Alzheimer's and dementia. And some of you who are in this field and you give talks like John and I do, I bet you have had people come up to you who say, what is the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia, right? You've all heard this. This is confusing. We know dementia is, I refer to it as an umbrella term, right? It describes this progressive impairment. So Alzheimer's is a form of dementia. What we really ought to be saying, and I wish we could educate our those newspaper article writers who call you up and say, I've got a deadline in 20 minutes, give me a quote. Any of you ever had that happen? Okay? And I wish we could educate them to say, Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. It's just a few more words to add, but it would clarify things so well. Okay? Dementia is changing in terms of the terminology that we are using. The new Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association doesn't really use the word dementia. It's retained it a little bit. It says, we'll use the word dementia, but we'll kind of reserve that mostly for older people. But what we really want to talk about are neurocognitive disorders of the mild or major type, so that at least the American Psychiatric Association believes that within about 5 years, we will all be talking about NCDs, okay, or neurocognitive disorders. I'm not so sure, but we'll wait and see on that. So DSM-5. However, I got to show you something that just popped up a few days ago. This is a screenshot. And this, look at this. So this is an issue. Ninth Circuit addresses senility among federal judges head on. I mean, my jaw dropped to the floor. I had not seen that word senility in years, except in articles about the history, that we use this term senility in the 19th century into the 20th century. If any of you have read Jesse Ballinger's wonderful book, The History of Dementia in America, he talks about this. So yes, we talked about senility in the 19th into the 20th century, but I hadn't heard anybody use that. This was just a couple days ago. And this is about the idea that federal judges by the Constitution are appointed, given lifetime appointments. And some of them are showing signs of dementia. All right? But they use this word senility. So this language issue is one that I think we all need to be paying attention to. So, Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. This is a list of many different forms of dementia. And I'm not going to run through them all. If anybody wants to talk specifically about any of them with me afterwards, I'd be glad to. Just to note this one, Lewy body disease. When I first started teaching many years ago, well, back in the 70s, I was teaching courses on aging, and into the 80s and 90s, we never talked about Lewy body disease. And some of you may have heard that, again, just I think last week, Robin Williams' wife said that he had Parkinson's and Lewy body. And that day, the server of the Lewy Body Disease Association went down, because so many people were tuning in to find out more about Lewy body, okay? We need to get better at talking about Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. I put a big purple arrow there because right now we say that Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia. But I think we need to get more sensitive to these other diagnostic categories. And I'll tell you a story about this. John and I were giving a talk a couple of years ago over in the Twin Cities for the Alzheimer's Association. And there had been a couple of morning plenary sessions, and then we broke into smaller groups. And I think we had a group of about this size in the room. And I showed a slide not quite like this, but similar, in which I listed out many different types of dementia. And then we went on and talked about the theme of whatever the workshop was that we were doing that day. And afterwards, a couple came up to me. And they were kind of shy about approaching, but came up, and the husband had my slides, and he had them on an iPad, and he pointed to the slide that listed all these different types. And he said his wife, who was standing right next to him, had primary progressive supranuclear palsy. And they said to me, with all the discussion about Alzheimer's disease this morning, we weren't sure whether we should stay. We weren't sure whether we were a part of this discussion. And I will never forget that. I can still see them in front of me. That they felt excluded because everybody on the stage in the plenaries was talking about Alzheimer's disease. So I really want us to be careful about this, because we're getting better at diagnosing these different forms of dementia. Now, I'm going to move on to another linguistic challenge. Oh, by the way, one can have mixed types here, something that a lot of people don't realize. that you can have more than one. And this is going to look very different in another 10 years. Okay, so here's another linguistic issue. Well, how should we refer to people who have dementia? Well, again, those newspaper article writers and magazine article writers and people on media, various places, they talk about dementia patients. This makes me crazy, okay? And yet you hear this all the time. And what does this do? This puts people into this very small category of a biomedical condition. And I have arthritis, but do people call me an arthritis patient? No, they call me a person who has arthritis, right? And so I ask you to call out people who refer to dementia patients. Stop that. And instead, talk about people who have dementia, right? And as a matter of fact, John and I have a very good friend who is a geriatric psychiatrist. He's out in Idaho now. And he refers now to people who have dementia as PhDs. I love it. Isn't that great? Really turns things on its head, doesn't it? But we've got to stop saying dementia patients. Okay, enough about language. I want to talk about individual differences just briefly here, because this is a strong theme that John and I have picked up from our European colleagues, that we need to emphasize that we are all unique. And some of you have heard the very common quote of, when you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia, okay? We're different, we're persons, we each have our own biographies, right? So we bring our personal history of physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being from a lifetime to this point at which we now have acquired this diagnostic label. But we are still persons who carry this history with us. And we differ from one another. And we differ from one another at the age when our symptoms appear. Your symptoms appeared early. Other people may not have their symptoms appear until they're in their 60s, 70s, possibly 80s, right? This is important to pay attention to this, because obviously many different things in our lives will be affected by just this factor of age. The way we express our symptoms. Remember, there are many different forms of dementia, and some people have a form of dementia that doesn't initially affect memory, okay? And yet what they have still falls into that category of dementia. So we need to be very careful about how we pay attention to how symptoms are expressed. People differ in the type of support they get from family members and friends. Some people don't want to talk about it. And other people are fine with saying, I just received a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. Well, they're not fine with it, but they say it. But we all have different levels of support and different types of support from people. We respond differently to treatments. Some people do quite well on Aricept and Namenda. Other people say, whoa, nothing, okay? Or I feel worse, right? So all different kinds of ways that we respond to treatments, both biomedical and psychosocial. The trajectory and the speed of progression, right? That will differ among people. And community support. That's why we're here today. We're here to talk about what kind of community support we get. It was just, I loved hearing your Secretary of Elder Services, I mean, I probably don't have her title quite correct, but talking about all the towns in Massachusetts and linking them up. And certainly in Wisconsin, we are thinking hard about the differences between our more urban areas and our rural areas. Our rural folks are so isolated, and I'm sure that's true in Massachusetts as well, okay? And we may need to think differently about the programs and services in more urban areas as compared to our rural areas. So community support. We are more than the sum of our cognitive abilities, but we live in this hypercognitive culture. Many of you probably know that phrase from the work of ethicist Stephen Post. This culture that so valorizes, how big the hard drive is, right? And so we live in a hypercognitive culture, but nevertheless, we have so much to learn from the creativity and resilience of people living with dementia. And this is another way that I think we can turn public opinion on its head. We tend to look at folks who have dementia and we think, oh, this poor person needs our help, needs our services. And we don't think about what they have to contribute to us, the gifts that they have to give back to us, a point that John will make in a few minutes. So, just briefly, what have we learned from our trips around the world? Well, we took a trip in England in 2011 because we wanted to see how memory cafes operated. I sent off emails to people. I had no clue who these people were, and I said, we want to come and attend a memory cafe. And so we went around England, as Beth said, our dementia tourism, and we saw no tourist sites in England, but we saw a lot of church basements. And that was a great way to learn about memory cafes. So, you can read about memory cafes, you can talk to people about them, but until you've actually gone and experienced it, I think it's really hard to fully understand what they're all about. John will be talking a little bit more about memory cafes in a few minutes. So we had that privilege of learning about memory cafes from the folks in England who were way ahead of us in establishing them. And then we've had this privilege of going to Alzheimer Europe meetings. Now these are very interesting. They pull together people from, on average, about 44 different countries. They're very exciting. And usually there's maybe 5 to 10 people from America, okay? And by the way, they are in English, so we did not have to learn how to speak Polish. But these are the themes of the ones that we went to, and I want to point out in particular this one in Malta. Note the title of the conference, Living Well in a Dementia-Friendly Society. Ooh, okay, really expanding out. And at that meeting, Olivia Mastry was present, and she's the person who has really done so much over in Minnesota for ACT on Alzheimer's. So you see some themes that come through here. We're talking about policy, talking about practice. I will mention that in a few minutes again. Here are some examples of dementia-friendly efforts that we have learned about. Belgium is developing dementia-friendly cities. Don't you like this? One of their goals in Belgium that they state in their national plan is the right to be different. Okay? We are not going to put everybody in this one basket and call it dementia patients. Okay? The right to be different. In Japan, over 4 million people have taken a 90-minute training on awareness that dementia affects many people, and a lot of young people have agreed to be dementia friends. So 4 million people. This was cool in Norway. They had this day when they sent out 100,000 volunteers, and the goal was to knock on every door in Norway and give people information about dementia. It's just astonishing to me. And then the Prime Minister of Great Britain, who you've probably heard about, David Cameron, has developed this program called Dementia Friends. You can go online and learn a lot more about that. So those are just some examples of some of the things that are happening in these other countries. So we have brought home 4 principles of dementia inclusivity that we've learned from Alzheimer Europe meetings. The first one, just what I said about dementia inclusivity. People with dementia need to be involved in all phases of planning, implementation, and evaluation of services. And this is a picture of the European Working Group of People with Dementia. All of these individuals have dementia. They're from many different countries. They advise the Alzheimer Europe organization on various kinds of topics. They, at the most recent meeting where John and I were in Slovenia, they spoke at plenary sessions. They led workshops. They had their own meetings. And I want to note especially this arrow that goes to this quote, "Nothing about us without us." You may be familiar with that phrase from the disability rights movement. Nothing about us without us. That is dementia inclusivity. And that is one of the very strong principles that we have brought back from these meetings. Another strong principle is this integration of research, practice, and policy, the 3-legged stool, okay? We've got to get these folks talking to each other, all right? We need one another. Those of us who are in the practice area, we get all excited about rushing forward with various kinds of programs and services, but maybe we should stop and see whether or not they're really having the effect that we think they're having. And this is a great opportunity to collaborate with researchers. And then when we put policies together, we need to make sure they actually work in practice and that they are supported by research. And once again, our 3-legged stool has got to be dementia inclusive. So we need people with dementia who are advising the researchers, the people designing the various practices, and the people who are creating policy. Third point that we have learned is the need for commitment from all levels of government and many different types of organizations. So it was great to see that your head of elder services was here today. And so we need this integration of these individuals. Here's an example. Earlier, the national plan was discussed. Okay, it has a really boring cover. You should see the one from England. The national plan from England has pictures of people on it, and it says on the cover, it says "living well with dementia." But this is ours. Okay, well, whatever. And so that's the national plan. And then you've heard a bit about what's going on over in Minnesota, our neighbor, Act on Alzheimer's. And then I was really happy to hear that the Dementia Friendly America initiative was mentioned. And that kind of links up these state efforts with the national effort. And by all means, check that out. Just Google Dementia Friendly America. They've got a really good website now. So here's what we're doing in Wisconsin, and you can find this. This is a document out of our Department of Health Services on building dementia-friendly communities. So we've got national level, state working on the national level, and then locally, the Fox Valley Memory Project, which is what you're going to hear John talk about in a couple of minutes. So all of these levels of government and community life need to be talking to one another. Okay, my fourth point. This is the time question. Remember I told you that was going to be a theme today? Time. Dementia inclusivity means that we need to find ways to meet people's changing needs. It is not enough to say we're a dementia-friendly community because we have one memory cafe. As John will note in a few minutes, there comes a point when a person may not be able to participate in memory cafes. So if we're really going to do this, we have to recognize that this is a progressive condition and figure out ways to remain in community regardless of where you are on this journey. So, now I'm going to hand things over to John for a case study in what happens in Northeast Wisconsin.
Connect yourself here. Is this the right one? Yes. All right. Just before I launch, a few things. Holding the presentation pointer to my mouth. That does not work so well. Shooting back to Europe and England for a moment. When Susan and I wrote our book, it was published in 2011, and exploring ideas around, our premise was more and more people developing dementia. Medical science ain't going to fix it. On my optimistic days, I think that there might be an effective upstream intervention that will benefit our grandchildren. Maybe. It's certainly not going to benefit any of us in this room. So what resources do we have for a growing number of people with dementia? And we explored the themes of friendship and community. How do I continue my friendship when my friend no longer remembers the story of our friendship? And how can communities be there? But it was a book of ideas. It was not a book of how to do it, because we didn't know how to do it. And that's when we looked at each other and said, now what do we do about these ideas we put out there, and started the dementia tourism. And just one story from England. The memory cafes were wonderful. And if you're a Yank doing memory cafes in Europe, it's like wandering into a Monty Python skit, hello! And we had a blast. And we learned quickly one of the rules was nobody goes to a memory cafe to observe, you go to participate. And I hope that's true in your cafes as well. Nobody stands at the wall and gawks, you take part. So we did that. But we had a visit in the home of a really marvelous couple in a rural village in Glastonbury. And he was the one identified as having dementia, his younger wife, second marriage for both of them. And we learned about the services that the National Health was bringing into their home. When we're at Alzheimer Europe, it's sometimes embarrassing to be an American because we are the only country represented there that does not have a true national health care system. And so the British National Health sent in monthly a community psychiatric nurse to evaluate how things were going and whether the care partner needed any additional support or services. At the time we visited, she was getting X number of hours of paid professional respite care. Someone was coming in to help with bathing and showering, et cetera. And the Brits have this odd notion that by providing these services at no cost in the home, people stay in their homes much longer, have a better quality of life, and it saves everyone much money in the long run. And I was also intrigued that he had a yearly evaluation by a psychiatrist in the home. And a day or two later, I met a British psychiatrist. I said, do you really visit your dementia patients in their own homes? And she looked at me as if I were the stupidest person she'd ever met and said, well, if I made them come to the medical center, they'd arrive anxious and confused, so how would I evaluate them? So we're bringing all this back with our heads spinning about how you do it well. But the other thing I want to mention about this couple, as we talked about their social life, still living in the village as his dementia progressed, that they went to 1 or 2 memory cafes each month. They went to a program called Singing for the Brain, similar but all musical. We have a version of that in the Fox Valley now. In their rural area, there was a monthly tea dance for persons with dementia and their carers. There was a monthly restaurant outing. They had a fuller social calendar than we did. a good, rich life and still going to the local shops and such. So these are all part of the vision that just woke us up when we came back and said, now we have to put something into practice. That became the Fox Valley Memory Project. So here's where we are, Northeast Wisconsin. Appleton's in there. That's kind of where we live. We consider Green Bay our northern suburb. They happen to have a football team. So we're here. And we knew from the outset, the first thing that we did was starting talking to other folk and hustled up a small grant to hold a community breakfast and think tank and to explore community interest and potential support. But we also wanted to make sure that at the table were all the people and organizations who had some sort of stake in this. We did not want to set up anything that could feel competitive because we had heard of that happening in other communities. So from the onset, county government, our Aging and Disability Resource Center at the table, Alzheimer's Association at the table, state government, Department of Health Services at the table. In our case, Lutheran Social Services, a rich social network in Wisconsin at the table. Goodwill Industries, they know something about people facing challenges. So we wanted to be collaborative from the very beginning. We also, to follow in Susan's theme, at the table were persons with a diagnosis and their care partners from the very onset. State representations mentioned, we did not want to become yet another independent 501c3. They are proliferating like dandelions and competing for the same dollars. We like to say that our long-term goal is to declare victory, close up the doors, and go home, that dementia inclusiveness will become so much a part of the water in community that a separate organization will not be needed. That's years down the road, and there are some structural things that need organization that we'll have to find a way to do. But we operate under a fiscal agent rather than doing the whole 9 yards to be a 501c3. And committed to providing programs and services for persons all along the continuum. One of my fears about memory cafes, easy, feel good about it, and then somebody is no longer able to attend. Well, it's been nice to have you be a part of our cafe. Good luck. We are, right now, we started with 2 very, very lovely grants. The down part of grants is that they sooner or later run out. And I'm sure it's as true as Massachusetts as anywhere else. It's just wonderfully easy to get a grant for something brand new and innovative, almost impossible to get grant money for ongoing support of something that's proved its worth and value. You know, fly, little bird, become independent, raise your own money. So we've had to deal with that ongoing issue of sustainability. We're struggling with that now. And we do have 3 part-time employees. One of the things we learned in England is that when dementia-friendly community initiatives, specifically memory cafes, are completely run by well-intended, good-hearted volunteers, they have a short shelf life. When the original volunteers lose their energy or their stamina, and there's no structure in place. So we hired right away a part-time person to get our memory cafes up and running, with responsibility for recruiting and training the volunteers, for putting out the monthly program schedule, for bugging those of us who are facilitators to lay out our plans ahead of time so that each month and the next month we can list what all the programs at all our cafes will be. Because some folks want to go to a single cafe where their friends are. Some pick and choose the cafes throughout the valley based on what's going on there that day. Some want to go to things that are musically focused. Some want to go to this or that. So we really need someone who's getting paid, who is responsible for keeping it going. So we have that. We are in 7 locations. Wanted to make it easy to access quite a variety of settings. Several of them are in public libraries, which are a really neat setting. And Susan and I have had the privilege of speaking to the state library, whatever organization, and encouraging libraries to get aboard. It's happening around the state. But we have meetings in community centers, one in a private for-profit coffee shop that's community-minded and gives us a room, One is in a nature center, which is a really cool place to have a memory cafe. And I'm not going to spend time with the images. We just celebrated our 3rd anniversary of the project in our memory cafes. And we had a birthday party for memory cafes. And I do want to tell you some things about that party. But at the cafe Susan and I facilitate, we have certain, you all know how memory cafes work, right? They vary tremendously. Each of our 7 locations, different facilitators, so different patterns. Ours is very much built around who we are, I think, in some ways. So we always start, Gary's been there, we do a song of greeting one another with my ukulele. It's expected I will bring my ukulele, and everybody is greeted musically by name. So we'd be going around with the ukulele and saying, hello, Ruth, how do you do? We're glad to say hello to you. Joanne, hello, Joanne, you're not helping me here. It would take too long with this many people, but in a memory cafe, we learned this in England too, when a woman said, I thought it was just Susan, but it's okay. When she talked about the singing for the brain, says, it's probably the only time in the week that anyone calls my husband by his name, and how lovely that they sing it to him. And often when we're singing to someone, face lights up, they wave, smile, stand up. One woman, for unaccountable reasons, when we sang to her, dropped to the floor and did 5 push-ups. So it's just a neat way to begin. We have a time for telling bad jokes and announcements, but then there's a program, and the bottom line rule is the program may not be just entertainment. It must engage the folks who are there creatively. So we do time slips, creative storytelling, we do poetry, we do all sorts of things, and once a year in our cafe we do a service project, because we are receiving from community, and our friends with dementia and their care partners want to give back. So next month we'll be making gifts for our homeless shelter in town, and that is just a really important component. Just because I have dementia doesn't mean I have nothing to give or a desire to give back. We eat. Yes, we do have snacks and such, and a lot of volunteers to help serve. We do 4 all-day outings every year. Hop on a bus with 55 people and go somewhere for a full day. This has been amazingly liberating for some of our folks for whom an all-day outing and traveling some distance had been unthinkable for years. And we just have good, goofy fun. Gary, who you'll be hearing from, went on our very first outing. We had to take a poet along, to document the trip. But, and our folks with dementia, our PhDs, helped to plan where we will go. So we started that day by going to a chocolate shop. Because just being able to buy gifts for the grandchildren is a big deal. And the staff greeted us as we got off the bus with silver trays with free chocolates. We had a nice lunch. We got on a riverboat and cruised. And Gary wrote a poem about our day, and we did a call and response in the bus ride home. And at our 3rd anniversary, we were asking people to share memories, longtime folks. And many of the most precious memories were things that happened on these all-day outings. So it's a neat component. And this speaks to the theme I want to talk about, having 3 years under our belts now, that time, 2 things having to do with time, is that we do a lot of evaluation as we go. Susan is our research lady. We evaluate because the people who give you money like to know that the money is accomplishing something. So we do measurement and research and evaluation. And after a year, we surveyed the folks participating and how meaningful the memory cafes were to them. And it's like, oh, they're nice, they're very nice. We have a good time, we look forward to it, it's good. We did it again after 3 years, and people were talking about transformation, radical difference in the experience over the years. And this is primarily, you know that dementia is a disease of exclusion and isolation, that friends do fall away, that social networks become thinner. And through the cafes and related services, folks have built new social networks. Care partners exchange phone numbers. They call each other to talk through some of their challenges. Couples with dementia hook up and go places together for lunch or for dinner. It's become a much richer social world. So what happens during the cafe, in some ways, is just a prelude to the web of friendship that builds and extends to the time between the cafes. The other thing about time is after 3 years, many of the people that we have come to cherish who participated regularly can no longer attend memory cafes because of the nature of the progression. And one of the things we want to assure them in the Memory Project is the project will still be here for you, because we are talking about maintaining a high quality of life through all the changing stages of this condition. We started, about 2 years ago, Susan, the chorus that named itself On a Positive Note, because music is such a source of joy. And as you all know, that even when short-term memory has weakened, the deeply practiced things remain. So we practice and we do public performances, and the Mormon Tabernacle Choir should not feel threatened, but it's a very, very joyous thing that we didn't know we were going to do, but it's an important part of the Memory Project now. We have a resource center. We like to call it a one-stop shop for information, referrals. We have a lending library, not just of books and video things that can go out into homes, but if you know the Music and Memory program, we lend out iPods and program them with favorite music, not just with headphones, but we send a little speaker along so that a family could listen together to that music. We are now making sensory kits to lend out to help engage folks deeper into dementia with themes around something like sports or camping or hunting or kitchens or whatever, to enable a friend or family member to engage creatively someone more advanced. But this picture, it's at the Resource Center, and anybody can call with questions. And by the way, you can also call the Alzheimer's Association, you can call the county ADRC, but we're not competing with them because they're a part of us. And they're overextended, so they're very, very happy to resource and enable us to do this through our own resource center with a trained counselor there several days a week, different times of the day. You can walk in, you can call, discuss a behavior that you find challenging, or I need this, I need that. But some of our guys with dementia, they wanted some guy time and they wanted to give back and do service, so they gather once a month at the Resource Center to paint birdhouses and bird feeders that we sell for a few dollars, just so they feel like they're giving something back to the Memory Project. Interestingly, many of the birdhouses seem to wind up painted in Green Bay Packer colors. We are now doing assessments. And I don't know how it is in Massachusetts. Under Medicare expectations, every primary care physician with a Medicare patient in an annual wellness visit is supposed to do a mini-cog evaluation. In Wisconsin, we're guessing about half of them do it, with all kinds of excuses. I don't know how, I don't have time. Oh, I know, Ernie, I'd see if something were going on, which is all nonsense. They're not doing it nearly as much as they should. But let's say the primary care physician does a mini-cog, says, yeah, I think it'd be a good idea to be assessed. The wait time to get an appointment with a neurologist or someone equipped to do it well can be more than 6 months, and that is cruel. That's unacceptable. To imagine living with that anxiety and not knowing for 6 months. We are doing our assessments more on a European model. We are doing it through this family health center where we are training residents, because as you know, nobody is training in geriatric medicine because that's a way to go broke. And primary care physicians are not all that well informed on geriatric medicine, even as we age. So we are trying to get to the young residents and make them fall in love with geriatric medicine and have them understand dementia. So we are trying to get folks in within a couple of weeks, and we are almost always starting with a visit in the home, like they do in England. And we send out our case management specialists, ideally with a young resident along with her. And there they can do like a kind of environmental assessment, but more importantly, build a relationship so that when the person comes in for these fairly frightening and demanding sequence of tests, they are greeted at the door or ideally at their car. Harold, I'm so glad you came. It's me, Beth. And to be with them supportively through this process. And two, we didn't even start doing assessments until we had a rich network of resources in place so that the assessment can be done in an environment with hope. Yes, it does seem like you likely have a dementia, probably of the Alzheimer's type. But let me tell you what we have to offer to make life continue to be good. We have memory cafes, we have this, we have that. To offer the environment in the assessment and hope, rather than doing what happens too often, which is look past the person being assessed to the daughter and say, yeah, your mother has Alzheimer's, here's a booklet. Unacceptable, unacceptable, and we need to get past that. Research ongoing. Here's my research partner, Susan, presenting various posters at Alzheimer's Europe in Slovenia about a month and a half ago of just some of the research projects we are doing associated with the memory project. By the way, in Slovenia, mentioning about other countries, all members of the Slovenian parliament have taken a Dementia Friends training. The entire federal, no, I don't say federal, but parliament of that country is educated on dementia. You know, we are so envious. Here's one we've been working hard to get going, working with employers. More and more people, one, because we're correctly diagnosing young onset Alzheimer's, and we're learning so much more about TBIs and dementia associated with it, and more people are working later into life. More people are going to be diagnosed while still employed, and depending upon that income and on the benefits. And the standard practice among employers has been document the poor performance and can them. And we're trying to educate employers also about the number of care partners who are employed. Employers can be pretty good now about parents meeting the needs of their children, not yet so sensitized to meeting the needs of mom or wife or husband. So we have this initiative. We're doing it with goodwill, part of our collaboration, because they know how to work with employment situations, and we're getting some investment from state government, which is really helpful. I could talk so long about each of these things. We still see our our first three priorities in the memory project are educate, educate, educate. And that's the heart of what we do, including primary care physicians. Boy, do they need it. Because one of our CME days full of primary care physicians, I said, how many of you are trained as geriatricians? One hand goes up. I said, how many of you figured out you're all becoming geriatricians without being trained to? And all the hands go up. They are hungry for knowledge and resources because the medical world is changing. And primary care physicians are actually an endangered species in some ways. Nobody's going to primary care. The smart young ones are going into orthopedic medicine to fix baby boomer knees rather than to take care of the whole aging baby boomer. So we have a crisis in the medical community. But we're out there anywhere we can be. Service clubs, libraries, faith communities, and I'm a former pastor, they're a hard nut to crack. I wish I had time to go into that one. Business groups, libraries, social workers, all these folks, we want to be an educated community, and we're making some headway. Purple Angel, how many of you do you have Purple Angel in Massachusetts? How many of you know Purple Angel? Only a few. You do. I know about it. You know about it. Okay, Purple Angel, I will talk about this a minute. It is an international movement. It began in Cornwall with one woman, one bold woman named Jane Moore, whose mother had dementia. And she, as a one-woman task force, went to every shop in the village that her mother liked to shop at. Says, my mother has dementia, and I want her to still be able to come here, so you need to know a little bit about it. And she developed the logo of the Purple Angel, now an international symbol that could be a restaurant, a shop, a post office, a bank, a city hall, a library, that persons with dementia will receive support and services in this establishment. We waited till we had the memory cafes established. The way I like to put it is that our memory cafe participants have gotten uppity. They feel safe and secure in memory cafes. They feel free from stigma in memory cafes. Now they want the entire community to feel just as safe and free from stigma. And they want to go to a restaurant and be well received. They want the appropriate support, but they want to be treated with dignity and respect. Here's a story. I've got a minute or two to tell this story, I think. A few. Okay, we're still in our time. It's all right. It's all right. Okay? All right. So we were in Malta for the Dementia Friendly Society, and we steal from only the best. We borrow ideas, but we steal outright. So I was at a workshop in Malta, and there was this couple in their 80s from Scotland, and he has Lewy body dementia. Okay, and Lewy body is nasty. It gives you all the wonderful things of Alzheimer's and throws in the visual hallucinations, and then has this little trick of good days and bad days. So when he was diagnosed, he went into what he calls his lost year, depression, which often accompanies dementia. Didn't leave the house, and his little plucky wife, she was all of like 4'9", says, "Enough of this, we're going to talk to the neighbors." And this little couple go door to door to their 20 nearest neighbors, some of whom they knew, some of whom they didn't, said, "Well, we got this thing called Lewy body, and if you don't mind, we'd like to tell you about it." Everybody very receptive. And he said, "So suddenly I could go for walks alone in my neighborhood. Because if I get lost or confused, someone pops out and says, 'Albert, do you need a bit of help?'" Because people want to help. They want to do the right thing, but they need to know what's going on. So he says, "That works so well, I went to the newsstand where I like to get my paper. And I said to the boy there, 'I got this thing.' He says, 'Well, I wondered, because some days you're a bit odd.' So I could go back there again, and if I forget what I want, he knows what I want. And I went to the bank and the post office, and finally I went to the supermarket, which was in walking distance." He says, "And now I go to the supermarket alone with my basket. And when I walk in, they say, 'Albert, did you bring your list, or do we have to call your wife again?' And someone walks him about to fill the basket. At the register, they take his money purse and count it out, give it back, give him the receipt. He got his life in community back again. And now that whole chain of supermarkets in the UK is Purple Angel dementia friendly. So, fairly simple training. When possible, environmental evaluation. The ideal environment for someone with dementia, we say, is quiet and well lit. And in one of my initial trainings, this bizarre bar in Appleton that is always decorated for all holidays with bright lights and Christmas decorations. It's dementia hell, okay? And here's the manager of Clio's. I said, "What are you doing here?" He says, "We've been at this location for 60 years. There are people in their 80s who had their first drink here, and they want to keep coming. And my 5 o'clock crowd is different than my midnight crowd. I want to take care of them." And similar with other businesses. So now we're really working this Purple Angel thing. Because if you've got even mild dementia, a typical American restaurant menu is unreadable and overwhelming. But a trained waitstaff person who recognizes that the person is struggling, it's not rocket science. Our chicken's very nice today. Do you like chicken? Don't ask the person with him, what'll he have? But just take the extra time, slow it down, offer a few simple suggestions. We stole from Scotland a tip sheet that's really the whole training in one fold-out pamphlet. Again, not rocket science, just commitment. And there's a business case to be built here. Aging population. You've all had the experience of going to your favorite supermarket and the rascals have completely rearranged it, and you don't know where anything is. That's every trip to the supermarket if you have dementia. The people who can't go to memory cafes any longer, but they're not nearly ready to be in skilled care. There's this in-between time where they're often horribly underserved. So the Rosalind Carter Institute reached out to us and funded the REACH program. So now through Mosaic Family Health, where we're doing our assessments, they're paying for a staff position and for training others to be resources of care partners in the home, to really work with them on that, I think, really neglected stage when you're no longer functioning really independently and coming to memory cafes, but not needing residential care. So we're really trying to work hard with that clientele through this wonderful grant from the Rosalind Carter Institute, the REACH program. We can talk more about this, but then we don't want to forget our friends and neighbors with dementia who are in residential care in the very advanced stages. You know, I am now part-time chaplain to two care facilities, one assisted living and one skilled care with memory care units. And it's a joy of my life. But what we do, because they're all operating on paper-thin margins, whether they're governmental, not-for-profit, or for-profit, they don't have the money to train their staff in the kind of creative engagement arts techniques that bring joy and meaning and laughter to folks with advanced dementia, who bring in people like Gary to teach the folks how to work with poetry, to do time slip storytelling. So we hustle a grant. And we bring training to as many facilities as want to. Our last one, we had 11 or 12 facilities, learning how to do creative, engaging drum circles with people with advanced dementia. People who are largely unable to speak can talk with drums. And it's an amazing, magical thing. And the training was also how to make the drums, okay? But we will want to keep doing that to, one of the things that drives us batty is a dear friend who's in our Department of Health Services likes to say, you know, 90% of people with dementia are still living in the community. And she's right. And that's a good way to talk about the importance of serving them. And we want to say, but aren't the residential care facilities also in the community? Have you left the community? Have you crossed some international boundary? Or is the community, we see skilled care facilities as surrounded by an invisible moat. And the only people who cross the bridge are people who work there and family members, and we need to transform that. So that's something we have passion about. And every time we do creative engagement training, we have a community celebration. We bring all these folks together. We load the wheelchairs up and bring them down to a community center, invite the public to say, look what these people with advanced dementia can still do. So when we had our drumming celebration, our instructor brought this huge honking drum in the middle of the room. People were taking turns, big drum. We had all these little drums, and we had several hundred people with advanced dementia going, we will rock you. I mean, we rocked that joint. We rocked that joint. So, quick notes here. Stay collaborative. Don't allow competition to happen. There's no right way to do it. You know, Minnesota started at the state level, resource and communities. We started at the community level, and now we're filtering it out through the State Department of Health Services. They both work. National models are important. In Europe, they don't believe a single country can do policy without consulting other countries. That's not going to happen here in these United States. But, and patience. It won't happen overnight. And some of the most powerful impacts of your dementia-friendly community programming take time before the best things happen. So, in the end, we use this line a lot. To stop talking the disease model and talk the disability model. In a lot of my Purple Angel talks, I say, you know, some of us are old enough to remember before the Americans with Disability Acts and how that was resisted. Oh, we don't see anybody in wheelchairs. Why should we invest in this stuff? And then we learned that those curb cuts for wheelchairs come in real handy if you're pushing a baby stroller or you've had knee surgery. It benefits all of us, even as it benefits all of us to have folks with physical disabilities out in our workplaces and communities. Dementia is a disability accommodated not with curb cuts, but with patience and kindness. And wouldn't that benefit all of us? Slow things down. People have so much to teach us within dementia. People ask me my chaplaincy, oh, I see what they get out of it. What do you get out of it? I said, oh, how do I begin to tell you? I finally learned what it is to live in the present moment. As a pastor, I used to talk about it. Now I've learned how to do it. And yes, it takes all of us, politicians, med stuff, social services, faith communities, artists. That's a good setup for your next presentation. Thank you.